Hello, Wonderhussy here, hanging out in a town you've probably never heard of called Jackson, California. Okay, Jackson was one of the first towns established during the gold rush in what's called the Mother Lode. The Mother Lode being the name for the western part of the Sierra Nevada mountains on the Sacramento side. I guess there was so much gold discovered there that they called it, and still call it, the Mother Lode. Okay, between 1848, when Jackson was first settled, and the 1950s, over $200 million worth of gold was mined in this area. In fact, $30 million worth of gold was mined right here at the Kennedy mine alone. That's right, $30 million worth of gold was pulled out of this one mine alone. And it's actually pretty interesting. They have this whole park set up over here where you can actually see the massive old tailings wheels from the mine. Okay, this mine opened in 1860 and operated off and on, and mostly on, all the way until 1942, when the federal government shut down all gold mining in the country because of the war. But between 1860 and 1942, yeah, something like $30 million worth of gold was extracted from this one mine alone. And they have this really cool park you can walk through that shows you these massive tailings wheels. Okay, I'm no mining engineer, but my layperson's understanding is when they're digging the ore out of the ground, they're throwing it over their shoulder essentially to create these giant tailings heaps. And I guess these wheels were used to dump the tailings into some kind of stream or river, and they piled up over there against a giant dam. In fact, you can still see the dam to this day. I'll have to zoom in. That's the impound dam that they piled up all these arsenic and cyanide rich tailings against. Which is probably why there's this giant area of open space right in the middle of Jackson and this park. They probably can't really build anything here because I'm sure it's super duper contaminated to this day. But what the hey, we're only going to be here for a few minutes. Let's walk over and take a closer look at this massive tailings wheel. I mean, say what you will about gold mining and the negative consequences it has on the environment and all that beautiful, sweet, juicy, prime California real estate back behind me. It's still impressive just to see the scale of this stuff. Wow, listen to that. It sounds like this giant, what, a 5-story building that they built to house this tailings wheel is actually air conditioned. I guess maybe they're trying to preserve the tailings wheel, because let me tell you something, it is a hot day today. I'm shooting this on September 24th and it's like 90 degrees. And despite all of that, I'm wearing pants. Now I know you're probably wondering to yourself, well, gee, Wonderhussy, you don't even like wearing clothes. Why are you wearing long pants on a hot day like this? Well, you're just gonna have to stay tuned to find out. But in the meantime, let's see if we can get a closer look at this giant, yeah, that is like a, what, 4-story, maybe even 5-story tall building, climate controlled building that the people of Jackson erected to preserve this giant old tailings wheel. Now, I don't know if you can even see anything through the glass. Hopefully there's not too much reflection. I'm gonna back up. You know, I feel like we gotta get some scale with this thing. I mean, look at it. I mean, to extract $30 million out of a single mine, well, I guess you would need some pretty massive equipment like that tailings wheel or this old, I guess, ore bucket. Look how cool the handle is. I love the elegance of that. Boy, that is heavy. I feel like I'm at the gym. Oh, it's a great workout. Anyway, yeah, these giant tailings wheels, I think there's 4 of them that you can check out in this park, are still being preserved to this day. And I think that's kind of cool. And it kind of reminds me of Butte, Montana. If you watch the video I made when I went to Butte, America, that's what they call it. It's a super contaminated old mining town up in Montana that pretty much embraces its toxic history and has a really good sense of humor about it. Like, I went in a souvenir store up there and they had t-shirts and stickers and coffee cups talking about the original heavy metals and we put the fun in super fun. Well, I don't know, call me twisted, but I think that kind of civic pride is admirable. I just noticed something on this giant ore bucket. This actually wasn't from the Kennedy mine. It says this was donated by Paul Crowley's family from the Argonaut mine. Okay, the Argonaut mine was a mine right near here somewhere that produced $25 million worth of gold. But unfortunately, there's no kind of park or museum or anything where you can go check it out today because, well, unfortunately, it was the home of the worst mining disaster in California history. So I guess it's not something they're like super proud of. But according to my research on Google Maps, you can still drive to the Argonaut mine and some of the buildings are still in place. You just have to go through a residential neighborhood to get to it. But at least this way we can get a feel for what it would be like to live right next to a contaminated mine site. Because this site, I know for a fact to be contaminated. In fact, I guess the ground here is so contaminated that they're trying to get it to be a part of the Superfund program. Okay, the Superfund program that Butte, Montana puts the fun into. It's a U.S. government program where the federal government will chip in money to help clean up these super contaminated sites, which I'm sure all the folks living in that pretty little suburban neighborhood right down the street from this would greatly appreciate. Wow, look at this. This is the once mighty Argonaut mine site. And you can see most of the buildings are still up and very heavily secured. Look at that razor wire fence. Danger! Toxic hazard. Keep out. EPA Argonaut Mine Superfund site. How about that? I guess they did get Superfund designation. And hopefully that means they'll be able to clean up this place enough to where they let folks go in and poke around the buildings. And now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, gee, Wonderhussy, why in tarnation would you want to go poking around a toxic, contaminated site? Because that's where all the most interesting stuff is. Duh! Well, I gotta get in the shade, man. It is so hot today, especially in these dang pants. Anyway, like I was saying earlier, I think something like $25 million worth of gold was mined out of this Argonaut mine, but it shut down in 1922 because there was a terrible mining disaster. Okay, I guess on August 27th, 1922, just over 100 years ago, there was a fire. A fire broke out down in the mine and 47 miners were trapped like 4,600 feet below the earth. And they tried to put out the fire, but it took them 3 days to put out the dang fire. And then it took them another 3 weeks to get to the level where the miners were. They ended up having to go through the Kennedy mine. I guess there were some closed off tunnels that the Kennedy mine hadn't been using since a fire over there a few years prior. Anyway, they burrowed in, they managed to get in and try to save the miners. But unfortunately, all 47 of them were already dead. And in fact, they think they died probably just a matter of hours after the fire broke out. I guess they found really haunting, written in, probably using a carbide lantern. I don't know, some miner wrote on the wall, 3:00 p.m., the gases are accumulating. I think they were basically asphyxiated by an accumulation of mine gases and carbon monoxide from the fire. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but yeah, 47 men ended up dying at the bottom of this mine. And I guess most of them were Serbian, Spanish, and Italian. Okay, remember, people came from all over the world to get rich quick in California, not just back in 1849, but in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, all the way up until the 1900s. The mines created jobs and people wanted work, so they came here from all over the place, including Serbia, Spain, and Italy. Anyway, one of the worst parts of this Argonaut mine disaster is the fact that the mine owners never had to pay any sort of fine or face any sort of legal consequence. Okay, I guess that's just the way it was back in 1922. There was no OSHA and there was no government oversight of mining operations, I guess. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, the families of those 47 men, I don't even know if they were so lucky as to get their deceased one's last paycheck. But apparently they did see to it that all the miners were recovered. I think it took like a year to recover the last one, but they were all recovered and they were all buried in cemeteries here in Jackson. And apparently you can still go visit some of their graves to this day. So let's get in the car and the air conditioning and go see if we can find some. Oh, so much better. Even though I'm still wearing these dang pants. Okay, I'm not really sure exactly where the poor guys who died in the Argonaut mine are buried. I thought this sign was pointing to their graves, but I think it just means they're buried somewhere in this vast Catholic cemetery. That's right, I guess back in the day, and maybe still to this day, they bury you segregated by your religion. And so because these particular miners were from Italy, Spain, and Serbia, well, I guess most of them were Catholic. There is a Serbian cemetery that I guess the Serbian ones are buried in, but the Spanish and the Italian guys are buried somewhere here. Oh, here we go. Argonaut mine tragedy, 1922 miners' graves. Supposedly, right back here somewhere. Oh gosh, look at this. It's like a big crypt and the little tiles are coming loose. It almost looks like little game pieces, like playing checkers with the dead. Well, I am definitely not taking any of these tiles because if anything were ever bad juju, that would be it. Anyway, I have no idea where these miners are buried, and it's too dang hot to be traipsing around here looking blindly. Oh, here, look. I'll bet you anything this is it. There's a big red, white, and blue wreath, and there's kind of like a monument under it. See if we can see what it says. I know it's kind of backlit. It says, in memory of Peter Bagoye, Raffaello Baldocci, Domenico Boleri, Eugene Buscaglia, John Caminada, Peter Cavaglieri, Manuel Costa, Paul DeLonga, A. Fazzini, V. Fideli, Simone Franciscioni, Battista Gamboni, Timothy Garcia, Maurice Gianetti, Giuseppe Giorza, Lucio Gonzalez, the brothers Antonio and Luis Leon, Battista Manacino, Pio Oliva, Emmanuel Olobardi, Aldino Piagneri, Giovannaria Ruzzi, Domenico Simondi, George Steinman, Daniele Viglia, and Cesare Zanardi, who died August 28, 1922 in the Argonaut mine fire. I didn't mean to laugh while I was reading those names. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but golly, it was a mouthful. Anyway, yeah, this plaque was dedicated by the Società di Unione e Beneficenza Italiana back in 1977. And I don't honestly know if the miners are actually buried here. I mean, it's just one big kind of, well, I hesitate to even call it a grave because there's no individual headstones. There's just all these rocks. And then somebody did leave this metal bucket. I guess the urn here. Maybe you're supposed to put flowers in there, or there were flowers in here. Oh, I feel bad. I didn't bring any flowers. But I did find this one on the ground. So here you go, guys. Rest in peace. I'm sorry you had to die in such a horrible way in pursuit of, oh, well, I was going to say such a silly, unimportant thing as gold, because when I think of gold, I mostly think of jewelry. But I guess gold does have a lot of industrial applications, and so the gold that these guys was mining was probably used to better the lives of all of us. But anyway, yeah, I'm not sure if these miners are actually buried in this thing. I mean, it goes on. really quite a long way. It's a long mass grave. I mean, I guess because there was a fire down in that mine, maybe they weren't able to determine whose remains were whose, and so they just kind of put everything in this big trough, for lack of a better word. Oh, there is this guy. Certain of the guys got their own tombstone, like Simone Francesconi. I think I remember his name from that list. Look at that, he was only, he was born in 74, so he was 26 plus 22. He's 48 years old. Very young. And then it looks like there might be another guy here who got a headstone, but it's so worn away, I can't quite make out what it says. And besides, it's way too hot to be hanging out in this cemetery, especially wearing pants. Okay, you're probably wondering why I've been complaining about wearing pants this entire video. Well, I wore these pants for a reason, okay? You're right. I don't like wearing clothes to begin with, but if I must wear clothes, well, I generally prefer wearing shorts or skirts or some kind of little dress or something. I just hate wearing friggin' pants. I don't know how you fellas do it, but I did put on these pants. I'm suffering in these pants for a reason, and that reason is somewhere in this cemetery. Again, it's way too hot to be walking around this cemetery, but unfortunately this is the day I happen to be here, and I really do want to find this one particular grave. And no, it's not the grave of Angelo Noce, who also happens to be buried here. Oh, you don't know who Angelo Noce was? Well, he's the guy who started Columbus Day. Okay, I know Columbus Day is kind of a controversial holiday these days. I think they call it Indigenous Peoples Day now, but back in the mining days, Italians were pretty much at the bottom of the food chain. I mean, it seems funny now because Italians have pretty well assimilated into American culture so well. Not so back in the day, in these mining days that I'm talking about. Oftentimes the Italians, the Dagos, were the ones who were sent down to do the dirty work. You know, they got the most dangerous jobs. They went the farthest, the deepest into the mine. And, well, that's probably why so many of them ended up perishing in this Argonaut mine disaster. Well, anyway, there was this one Italian miner in Colorado who wanted to do something for his people. He saw all these hardworking Italians, you know, busting their humps, extracting all these precious minerals for the benefit of all of us. And he just wanted the Italians to get some recognition. And Christopher Columbus, who discovered America, was from Italy, and so that was his way of, I guess, getting the rest of America to honor his countrymen. I guess he started Columbus Day back in Colorado. I think he lived in Denver, somewhere in the Denver area, and so Colorado was the first state to make Columbus Day a holiday. And then I guess it kind of gathered steam, and as Italians became a bigger part of the American fabric, well, then eventually it became a federal holiday. And apparently the guy who started it all is buried here somewhere. Even though, like I said, he was from Colorado, and I'm pretty sure he died in Denver. I have no idea how this dude ended up getting buried in Jackson, California, but apparently that's the case. Unfortunately, it's too hot for me to go looking for his grave right now because there's still this one other grave that frankly, it's the reason for this whole video. I came here because I wanted to pay tribute to this grave of a very interesting woman. And I think this might be it right here. Oh yeah, it is it. Wow, I'm so happy I found it because, let me tell you something. It is too hot to be wearing these pants much longer. Okay, this is the grave of a French woman named Marie Suisse, better known as Madame Pantalon. You can see there's her signature, Marie Suisse Pantalon. And if you didn't know, pantalon means pants, and that's why I'm sweating my you-know-what off wearing these dang jeans in honor of Madame Pantalon. Okay, to be honest, this isn't even actually her grave. Unfortunately, Madame Pantalon died penniless, and so they didn't even put up a headstone for her, and they don't know exactly where in this vast Catholic cemetery, she really is buried. But because she was a historical personage of such note, well, I guess these historical societies got together and placed this sort of memorial headstone in her honor at a random location. I mean, no telling who's really buried here. It could be somebody terrible, but yeah, apparently this group called the Questers, in conjunction with Amador County, that's the county Jackson is in, placed this memorial plaque here so that people could remember Madame Pantalon. And since this isn't actually her real grave, well, I don't feel rude in going over here into the shade to tell you the story of why she is so noteworthy. Now, I'd like to do it right there at her gravestone, but oh my gosh, it's so hot. I mean, I guess that's something you don't really think about when you're choosing a burial site. You want to pick someplace that has some shade, especially in a hot part of the country like this. Okay, the reason I came here to pay my respects at the grave of Marie Pantalon is she was a badass. Okay, this was back in the gold rush days, the actual gold rush, you know, well, gold was discovered in 1848, but word really got out in 1849. And I think the peak year of people flooding to California was 1852. Well, Marie Pantalon, she was one of the early ones. She was living in France. She came from a big family, had a bunch of kids, didn't have a lot of money. She went to Paris as a young woman and started working for a newspaper, and then she heard about gold being discovered in California. And so she thought, well, I want a piece of that. And so she sailed all the way from France to San Francisco, and then took a steamboat up the Sacramento River, and then took a stagecoach right here to Jackson, California, where she set up shop as a miner, which was very unusual for the time because back in those days, California was a literal sausage fest. I mean, it was a man's world. But Marie Suisse didn't let any of that bother her. She was brave enough to come all the way out here to Jackson and somehow went into business as a miner. I guess she got some guy to bankroll her, and she ended up running like a whole mining operation. She had guys working under her, and she was supposed to be a very stern businesswoman and a stern person. Like, she had a pistol and she knew how to use it, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Okay, I guess there was this one incident where these Canadian miners were trying to pilfer ore out of her mine, and she ended up blocking them in the mine and sitting at the entrance with, I guess she had a big soup tureen full of pepper and a gun, and she said she was going to throw the pepper in their faces and then shoot them if they tried to come out, until they finally agreed to surrender and she got her mine back. And man, she just sounded like she was a real tough lady and a total badass. But you know, history is full of tough ladies and badasses, and you don't see me sweating my tuchus off in pants for them. No, the reason I'm here for Marie is, well, she kind of fought for women's rights, in a way. Okay, believe it or not, it was actually illegal for women to wear pants back in those days. At least in California, anyways. I guess in France, they had passed a law allowing women to wear pants, I think as early as 1800. But isn't that the way? The Europeans are always culturally ahead of us puritanical Americans. Anyway, back then, not only was it illegal for women to wear pants in California, it was illegal for anyone to cross-dress. Cross-dressing was illegal. And unfortunately, well, Marie Pantalon, as you might guess from her nickname, ran afoul of the law because she's out here trying to prospect, mine for gold, dig trenches in petticoats. And it was just so cumbersome that one day she showed up to work wearing pants, you know, men's dungarees, like the Levi Strauss Company started in San Francisco, I think in the 1850s, for that express purpose, to serve all these miners that were coming out here to work. And that was hard physical work, man. You needed good, strong pants. You couldn't be fussing around with petticoats. And so I guess Marie Suisse got hold of a pair of Levi's or some kind of dungarees of some sort and showed up to work wearing pants. And it caused a huge uproar because it was already unusual enough to have a woman mining. Well, to have a woman miner wearing pants on top of it all? Sacre bleu! Anyway, she became noteworthy because I guess she wore her pants everywhere she went, and folks around Jackson, I guess, got kind of used to it, but then when she went traveling, it became an issue. And she ended up being arrested 3 times for transvestitism. I guess that's a word. For being a transvestite, for cross-dressing. Okay, all this talk nowadays about transgender this and that and bathrooms and blah, blah, blah. Well, apparently this has been an issue for quite some time, to the point where it was illegal to be a transvestite in California in the 1840s and 50s. My, how times have changed. I mean, nowadays I'd get arrested if I walked around without pants on. And believe it or not, I've had a few close calls in that regard. Anyway, Marie Pantalon was arrested first in Virginia City, okay? Virginia City, the iconic silver mining town in the mountains outside Reno. I don't know, she had business in Virginia City. She was out there for some reason. And they arrested her, and she had to go into court, and she was sentenced to put her dress back on and leave town. And so she did, and I guess later as she was traveling along, she happened to pass through San Francisco, and she went into some tavern wearing her pants, and she was arrested again for the second time. And this time, the judge didn't go so easy on her. He didn't just sentence her to put her dress back on and get out of town. Now, that time she had to pay a $5 fine, which back in those days was probably a pretty significant amount of money. And then the third time she was arrested was actually back here in Jackson. I guess she came home. The folks here, you know how it is. I'm sure there were these busybody women, you know. Yeah, sure, this was a sausage fest back in the 1840s and 1850s, but once the miners got situated and built cabins and towns, well, they were lonely, so they sent for their wives and sweethearts. And before you know it, there were schools and churches, and there were ladies' auxiliary meetings, and I'm sure there were society matrons who were scandalized at the fact that this French woman miner, was wearing pants in public. And so they probably raised some kind of fuss, which ended up in Marie Suisse getting dragged back into court for a third time. But this time, she actually got off, okay? Yes, there were church ladies that were complaining about her pants, but this was also an era when the suffragette movement started its first little beginnings, you know, trying to get women the right to vote. Because back in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way until the 1920s, women couldn't vote, okay? Women had no rights whatsoever. But I guess there was some kind of nascent suffragist movement in Jackson, and those women turned out in full force, and maybe there were some guys associated with it too. A bunch of them came to the court and protested, and so the judge actually let her go. She was free to go and wear pants as much as she wanted. Yay! I mean, to be fair, in this kind of heat, if they had had shorts back then, I'm sure Marie Suisse would have worn shorts, and she might have a different nickname to this day. Daisy Duke. And believe me, I did bring shorts with me. They're waiting for me in my car, and I'm gonna put them on the second I'm done shooting this video. But for now, I figured it was worth it to suffer just a little in honor of Marie Suisse, who suffered so that I could suffer. Thanks a lot, Marie. Just kidding. I know, she really was a groundbreaker, and that's why I'm here, paying tribute to her. Okay, this headstone that they placed at this random spot in the cemetery, it has her signature, which they obtained from a petition that only men normally signed. I guess back in those days, women weren't even allowed to sign petitions, but I guess she was such a badass that they allowed her to sign this petition, and that's where that example of her signature came from. It says, in memory of Madame Pantalon, Jean-Marie Suisse, born 14 July 1824 in Thones, I don't know how you say that, now in France, died 8 January 1892 near Clinton, California. Buried in this cemetery in an unmarked grave. Early pioneer, gold mine owner, probably California's first woman wine and brandy maker. How about that? Now I really like this lady. And then it says, she preferred wearing a man's pants rather than a woman's dress, breaking custom, if not law, in San Francisco and Virginia City. In Amador, there is no evidence she faced similar harassment or indignity. Well, that's interesting because according to everything I read online, she was arrested here in Jackson, but they let her off without any kind of jail time, fine, or put your dress back on and leave town. So I'm not really sure what the story is there, but then there's another plaque right underneath her memorial headstone that was placed by the community of Thones, and apologies again to any French residents of this cemetery, and if there's any French viewers watching, please let me know how to pronounce this. But that's the town she came from. It says it was now in France, which I guess maybe back then it was part of Spain or something. Maybe it was like the Basque region. Oh, I'm gonna have to do some research into this. I guess I should have done that research before I made this video. Sorry. Anyway, they wanted to thank the Questers, that's that historical group, and the Amador County Sesquicentennial Committee for honoring our sister citizen Marie Suisse, who is still known as Marie Pantalon, in our local memory. Oh, hold on. Isn't that the Swiss flag? And doesn't Suisse mean Swiss? So maybe she was from a part of France that's now part of Switzerland. Aha! I may have gone to American public schools, but I can figure out a thing or two on my own every now and then. Okay, again, I'm sorry I didn't bring any flowers or anything to leave on Marie Pantalon's grave. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'd like to take these sweaty-ass jeans off and leave them on her grave as a tribute. But I feel like that might be frowned upon and, well, maybe even seen as insulting. So I'll just step away, bidding adieu and merci to Madame Pantalon for allowing me to become intimately acquainted with the pleasures of Swamp Pass. Thank you, my lady.